section, nothing is new. You know how to find the slope from a graph, you know how to find the slope from a table, and you know how to find the slope from an equation. You also should know how to find the y-intercept for all those types of equations and tables and graphs as well. So, this is all review. The only thing new here is these words right here, which are just comparison words. How do they compare? Which one is greater than which? So, in terms of this problem, let's do function A first, because it's the quickest. When the y is by itself, then the number that touches the x is your slope, and the y-intercept is the constant at the end. So this is the constant, that's your y-intercept. The number that's touching or being multiplied by the x is your slope. So for the equation side, not much work to be done. You're just circling those two and writing the answers. Now let's go to function B, which is a different function. Once we have the same information for both, we can answer these questions down below. So first of all, to find the slope, when you have a graph, you have to mark 2 points from left to right. So the first point I'm going to mark is right here. Next point is right here. Now, you have to go from the point on the left to the point on the right. So left to right. So make sure you start in this case on the bottom point. So we go up 2 boxes, which is positive 2, and right 1 box, which is positive 1. 2 over 1 would be 2. So the slope for function B is 2. Now the y-intercept is also easy to find on a graph. Where does this red line touch your y-axis? It touches right here on this number. What number is that on the y-axis? Positive 1. So now we can go to the answer choices here and select all the true statements. So the first one says that A has a greater slope than B. So let's compare the slopes for A and B. We have -2 for A, +2 for B. B is greater. So you select the second option that says A has a lesser slope than B. Now we compare the y-intercepts. You have -3 over here, +1 over here. Again, A is less than B. So we select the one that says A is less than B for its y-intercepts. Any questions on that? Now in this next problem, I want you to try it completely on your own, but use your same steps. Alright, so on function A, since the y is by itself, the slope is clearly visible, m equals 2/3, and the y-intercept is the constant, which is +2. So we already have the information needed to answer the questions on the bottom for function A. Now let's go to function B. Both things we need are the y-intercept, which is -2. Again, the y-intercept is where the red line touches your y-axis. And then the slope, in order to find the slope on a graph, you have to mark 2 points and go up and right or down and right. In this case, it would be up 1 and right 2. So the slope is 1/2. And now we can compare them. 2/3 is greater than 1/2. So we know that A has a greater slope. Now let's compare the y-intercepts for both. +2, -2. Again, A is greater in terms of the y-intercept. Any questions on the first section? Now, on this next problem, let me explain the first one to you, and then you can try to do the second one on your own. So here, function B is the one that's pretty much already given to us. We can see the slope, which is +3, and the y-intercept is +1. So for function B, no work required. You just look at what's touching the x, and you write it next to m because that would be the slope. And then you label +1b because b is what you label the y-intercept. Now in this case, it's a table. When you have a table, you have to do a little more work to find these two pieces of information out. First thing you do is find the slope. by using the slope formula. The slope formula is the second y minus the first over the second x minus the first. So I'm going to graph 12, subtract 7 from it, put it over 2, and subtract 1 from it. Second one minus the first, second x minus the first x. Now that'll give me 5 over 1, so my slope is 5. So let's answer the slope question already. 5 is bigger than 3, so A has a greater slope. Now, here we have the y-intercept, but on the table we don't. In order to find the y-intercept, you have to write y equals mx plus b, and replace the m with 5, and replace the x and the y with the information on any of these points. What will be the point that's the easiest one to use? 1, 7, because those are the smallest numbers. So 7 is the y, 1 is the x. Make sure you put it on the right spot. And now we just have to solve for b. We have 7 equals 5 plus b. The only thing you have to do is subtract 5 from both sides. And now we have the b value. b equals positive 2. So now let's compare the y-intercepts. A has positive 2 y-intercept, but function b has a positive 1 y-intercept. Again, A has a larger y-intercept. So far so good. Any questions on this one before you try the next one on your own? Let me know, that's what I'm here for. Alright, here's the one you're going to try on your own. I want you to use the same exact steps. I know I only put 3 points. It doesn't matter. All you need is 2 points. So as long as you have 2 or more, you can do the same exact steps. Alright, let's review this example. Let's do the graph first. The graph is a little bit easier. The y-intercept would be positive 5 because that is the spot where the blue line touches your y-axis. So for b, you put positive 5 for the y-intercept. And now the slope, you have to mark the second point, and they go up and right or down and right. Here we go up 5, right 1, so the slope is 5. Now we come here to the table, and we try to figure out the slope first. So, I say second y minus the first, but I also told you you can use any 2 points you want. Don't use these negative points. What's the point if you can just use these 2? 17 minus 14 over 6 minus 5. That gives me 3 over 1. So my slope is 3. Now we need the y-intercept. To find the y-intercept, you just have to write y equals mx plus b, but you replace m with 3, and you replace the y and the x from any of the points in the table. What do you think the easiest points to use are? 5, 14, because those are the smaller numbers. So 14 goes here where the y is, 5 goes where the x is. Now we just have to solve for b. So we have 14 equals 15 plus b. To get b by itself, you have to subtract 15 from both sides. 14 minus 15 is negative 1. So we know the y-intercept for function a is negative 1. Now we can do a comparison. First we compare the slopes. A has a positive 3 slope, B has a positive 5 slope. A is a smaller slope than B. Now we go to negative 1 y-intercept for A, positive 5 y-intercept. B is larger. So we again have to select the part that says A is smaller, or A is lesser. Any questions on that one? Now this is the last section we're going to review. And on this one, they don't want the x or y intercept, they don't want the slope. Alright, so in this case, no y-intercept, no slope. That's not what they're asking you to compare. They're asking you to compare the y values when x equals 1. And then they want you to compare the y values when x equals 0. And lastly, they want to compare the y values when x is negative 3. So I'm going to show you how to do all three of those from a graph and from an equation. Again, none of this is new. You've already done this on the function section. So it says when x equals 1. So the first thing you have to do is go to your x-axis and go to that number, positive 1. That would be right here. Now I just have to go up or down to touch my line. In this case, I have to go up to touch the line. So this point right here, where it touches the line, connected to the y-axis, so you can see what number is related to 1 on the x. So if we connect it to your y-axis, what number is related to a positive 1x on function A? Positive 10. You with me? Now, that same question for function B is done differently because in function B, they give you the equation. When they give you the equation, it's pretty easy. All you have to do is replace the number into the equation for x. So that would be 3 times 1, which is 3, minus 2 would be positive 1. Now we can answer positive 1. So now we can answer the question here. Right at the right spot. Positive 1 here. So now 10 is greater than 1. So we know that we have to select the one that says that A is greater. We select the first box. Now we can skip over to the blue side because if the first one is correct, the second one has to be incorrect. It says the same thing, but one says greater, one says less. So now we do the same thing. I'm going to do it in blue so you don't get confused with the other one. For x equals 0. So again, you go to the x-axis and you go to 0. X-axis, go to 0, which is right here. And now go up or down to touch your line. In this case, I got to go up. As soon as I touch my blue line, I put a dot. Now, what y value is associated with that spot? Positive 5. Now we can do the same thing, but we have an equation. So all we're doing is plugging in the 0 into the equation. 3 times 0 is 0. 0 minus 2 is negative 2. Now we can compare them. 5 is greater than negative 2, so we select the first one, the one that says that A is greater. Now the last question says when x equals negative 3. So we go to the x-axis again, we go to negative 3, put a dot, and now we just have to connect with our line. In this case, if I go up, I'm not going to touch my blue line. So go down to touch your blue line. It touches right here. Now connect to your y-axis. What number is related to negative 3x? Negative 10. Now in the equation, you just plug it in. 3 times negative 3 minus 2 would be negative 11. Now what would be greater? Negative 10 or negative 11? Negative 10 would be greater because the negative numbers, the bigger the negative, the smaller it is. So in this case, A is greater again. And that's it. This is what this section is about, just comparing the two functions. So for example, let me show you the worksheet that you're going to be working on so I can tell you where to write what. Okay, so let me just show you number 2. really quickly. So for number 2, you have g of x here, and you have f of x over there. So the table is f, the graph is g. So you find the slope for both and the y-intercept for both. In this case, they want you to find the y-intercept for both. So for example, -3 is the y-intercept on f. How do we know that? Because wherever the x value is 0, that other number is your y-intercept. And now look at the graph. This line touches the y-axis on what number? Right here, on -1. So now, on these two lines, this is where you describe. This is where you compare the two functions. So this is where you need to write f of x is less than g of x, for example, because -3 is less than -1. So you would describe it saying this. You with me? If it was greater, you would put f of x is greater than g of x. Any questions?